what I was capable of. And then they tell the school what I was capable of. And then the school would tell me, I'm a Chevette, learn how to fix air conditioners. And there's nothing wrong with being a tradesman, nothing wrong at all, right?
So
But
your parents, were they around to see this transformation?
they were, the early years were very, very tough for them. Very, very tough. In the 1960s, when you're told your kid has brain damage, I think they used to use the word minimal brain damage or organic brain damage. I wish I had better lighting for you.
No, this is perfect. Hi, and welcome to another edition for the Trustcast Show. And we have with us Adam Wasserman, and he's not in his office today, so we were just talking about the lighting, but it looks fine, Adam. So Adam grew up being called lazy, not capable, and struggled through every stage of his own education. He was told he wouldn't amount to much, and today he is a special education attorney who personally shows up to his clients' IEP meetings and has built educational software that's now used in almost every state in the country. He's also studied philosophy in Jerusalem and traditional Chinese medicine for 3 years, which we'll get into. So you've told the story about being 22 years old, walking down the hallway at your first job and hearing a recording through a closed door that said, you can go anywhere you want to go. You can be anything you want to be. What changed inside you at that moment?
That was one of the most profound moments of my life. And it was actually by this incredible human being. I almost refer to him as my spiritual father. His name was Zig Ziglar. And he was really the first of the motivational speakers, the success performance trainers in the world.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a second because, as a secondary endorsement, I love Zig Ziglar. He is absolutely fantastic. So go ahead, go on. I'm endorsing that
He,
100%.
he gave me that first bit of light of metaconsciousness. We don't act the way we feel. We don't act the way we think. We don't take others' instructions and take them as the rule of law. We learn to listen to ourselves. And at that very moment, that's the message that I got from him. If you don't like what you've heard, that's okay. If you don't like where you are, you don't have to be there. And if you don't like who you are, you can be somebody else. There's a world waiting for you to discover that has nothing to do with what you've experienced up until that point. And that was the brightest ray of sunlight I ever received in my life. And I'm grateful for it every day.
Wow.
It was
That's
almost like, it was almost like the music from Rocky started to play in the background for the first time in my life.
That's profound for me too, because Zig Ziglar, I mean, I had I had a bunch of his tapes, and I bought so many books, and I've really been an acolyte of Zig Ziglar for decades.
Yeah.
And so that's
Well,
really interesting.
he says you were born to win, right? And I think the question for us, especially those of us who look through a different kaleidoscope every day, is what does that mean to me personally? What is my heart's desire? What is a decent, independent, successful life mean to me as a human being? And can I allow myself the chance to get to know myself enough so I can figure that out?
And so do you feel like you're on that journey?
Oh, yes. I'm on that journey, and through that process I've become unstoppable.
So I'm gonna go kind of all over the place, and then I want to know. Well, actually, I want to go first. You said you've become unstoppable. Tell me about that feeling. Let's just go right there.
Well, when you come into this world with two strikes against you, you come into this world with a pretty significant brain injury, and people are telling your parents that you'll never ride a bicycle or play a musical instrument or graduate from high school. It's very polarizing. And then when you get teachers who get a hold of that information and feel like they're off the hook because they've got someone with them who's substandard, and what they're going to try is not going to make a difference. It sets the stage. It sets the stage for being surrounded by people who disempower you, for people who'd rather listen to people who don't know you and follow their advice tacitly, than teach you to look as deeply within yourself and say, how do I find my way through this? How do I thread the needle of my life and get these distractions out of my way?
So because that's a long ways between, where you were and then at 22 having this metamorphosis. How did you, navigate through that? It must have.
Oh, we can spend weeks talking about that. But, fortunately, the sparks came from people. For example, I remember there was this school psychologist I dealt with in 10th grade, and I was failing a class, failing miserably. And I had my head down on the desk and I was in tears because my social studies teacher had chewed me out in front of everybody. I just couldn't remember what I read, and I'd fall asleep in class. So the school psychologist grabbed me. I saw her at the door. She waved me down. She sat me down in her office and said, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I want to do something great. I want to make a difference. I'm thinking about law. And she asked me this question. She says, do you know what a Chevy Chevette is, Adam? And I said, I do know what a Chevy Chevette is. And for your listeners who don't know what a Chevy Chevette is, Chevy Chevette was a Chevrolet's attempt to compete with Honda with an economy car. But it was the most ugliest, least reliable, unattractive form of transportation you can imagine. And you don't know about it because it didn't last. But she asked me if I liked cars, and I said yes. And she says, what kind of car would you be, Adam? I think I said what any 10th grader would say at that point. I'd love to be a Porsche. I'd love to have that kind of power. And she says, that's a good car. She says, well, what about a Chevy Chevette? It gets you from point A to point B. It does a decent job, and it's enough. And she says, Adam, if you can accept yourself as a Chevette, you're going to feel a lot better about your life and a lot better about who you are. I think in terms of destructive conversations, in terms of me really rapidly losing my faith in public education, I think that was the pinnacle of it. But for all the harm that she did, 2 years later, there was a new person in her place. And I was getting ready to graduate. I wasn't getting a New York State Regents diploma, never took chemistry, never took Gen Ed biology. I don't think I took geometry. She sat me down in her office. Beautiful woman. She had been a nun most of her life. She had this billowy silver hair, it's almost like clouds, this Venetian nose, and she wore this silky gray shirt with a big, bow tie. And she sat me down 3 days before I graduated, and she says, Adam, I got students going to Harvard and Yale, but you are going to be my success story. Right? And it was almost like that Zig Ziglar moment.
That's awesome.
I believed her.
So hang on just a second. I got to change my lighting. I didn't notice this until I saw the reflection in my eyes. You can't even see my eyes. I have on my overhead lighting. I usually turn it off. I just am a little remiss. Just 1 second.
So,
Probably not a big deal, but it was bothering me. So that's a good story. So you've talked about an alter ego that emerged at a very young age, a voice that told you to block it out and just keep going.
I call it metaconsciousness. The word ego is kind of, I think the word ego is a driving force that adapts to what's around us. But metaconsciousness, and I'll talk to you a little more about this, how I actually truly discovered metaconsciousness and how it drove me out of my ADHD and drove me out of my dyslexia and my learning disabilities and my impulsive behavior. that is the key, learning to listen to yourself, learning to know yourself, and then going as far as you can with it and not looking back.
So what is metaconsciousness? Can anyone harness that?
Well, yes, I think in the most historical way, it comes from meditation. It comes from the Zen Buddhist. It comes from the Tibetan Buddhist. It's the practice of observing your thoughts and watching your thoughts, scrutinizing your feelings, but not getting involved in the rumination of it all. Because what I've found, and I'm going to tell you how I got there, what I have found, the more you do that, the more they fall apart. The more you realize that these very strong emotions or these very strong feelings or very strong thoughts we have are more like a conglomeration of our whole life events turning into a snowball rather than just dealing with what's happening now. And so metaconsciousness, when we can practice it, really gives us the ability to know ourselves. And I will say this, most of us don't know ourselves, disabled or not. Most of us are so strapped into these systems that we feel like we have to support and be part of and subscribe to. We go through life missing it, and we look for resources to overcome disabilities or grief or tragedy or loss. And we're taught to look outwards. We're not taught to let that quiet voice arise within ourselves that in my experience really is the most powerful and the most pure directive we can receive. And when you're ready, I'll really tell you how I found mine.
Okay, I'm ready right now.
All right. So I was a salesman. I went to a college for learning disabled students. I am special ed. Special ed was my whole educational experience. And I finished and I got a job. I got a job knocking on doors in New York, leasing real estate. And I didn't like it, but I was very good at it. But I knew I
That'll
wanted.
toughen you up.
It did toughen me up. It was an incredible experience. I made a lot of money as a kid. I wore beautiful suits. I drove a great car. And everyone who knew me said, see, you found your way. Just waiting for you. I always knew it. Always knew you could do it. And I got awards. But it's like I felt like there was all this unfinished business. And I was like, hell, I'm succeeding at this. I can go back to school and do it again, right? So I decided I was going to do school 2.0, right? After I heard Zig Ziglar tell me those magic words, right? And I managed to talk myself into graduate school. My SAT scores were in the bottom 10th, 15th percentile. Can't go lower. That's what you get for signing your name and answering a couple questions right, right? But I was convinced in my heart of hearts that I could do it this time. And I still wanted to be a lawyer, but I couldn't take the LSATs. I couldn't even listen to somebody talk for 10 minutes, right? One thing that helped me extraordinarily as a child was music. Because music gets you right to your metaconsciousness. Music awakens something deep within us that's very, very hard to find anywhere else, right?
Yep.
And the thing that taught me how to play and read music was the metronome. What wasn't someone standing over my shoulder, correcting me and pointing me. It was the metronome. It was that beat. It was that consistent click. So I had this crazy idea that I was going to live to the metronome for 3.5 hours a day. And I did this for 6 months. I got up every morning and I breathed to the metronome for an hour. And then I walked to the metronome for an hour. And then I read to the metronome for an hour. And then I wrote to the metronome.
So I want to ask you just a couple of questions because to me that's remarkable for someone who is special needs or special ed or whatever you want to call it, who's ADD, to be able to have that discipline. Was it just the the steady beat that allowed you to kind of change things around, or watching that thing go back and forth, or
Well, I think for the first time, I was able to stop thinking and start listening. And I was able to find the strength and resilience inside. And through that, I came up with all these coping mechanisms, and I came up with these tools that I created for overcoming. For example, you mentioned the software program I developed. So when somebody takes the bar exam today, or any law school exam, or almost any law exam, they use the platform I developed called ExamSoft, coast to coast, classroom to classroom. That ideas and the development of that software, I had partners, but it mostly came out of that experience. A reminder that, an awareness that there were tools now available in 1991 that I could access, that could organize and remember and structure and scaffold for me. And that's where that software comes from. And I can't tell you how many millions of mainstream people use that every day to help them focus and do better based on the principles that allowed me to evolve as a human being. And that metronome got me to the LSATs. And I flipped it. I ended up in the top 15th percentile instead of the bottom. Who gets to do that based on Stanley Kaplan or Princeton Review or any of those? It doesn't happen that way, right? So that metronome was very profound. It taught me that simple beat taught me so much about myself.
so now I'm real interested in the software. So how does it work?
Well, I mean, the notion when we started, today we take cut, copying, and pasting for granted. It wasn't something most of us had the ability to do, right? We take typing for granted, right? We take the ability to reorganize thoughts and ideas and outlining for granted. We take OCRing for granted. We take the ability to break things into simpler screens, to chunk and parse it, to make it easier for us to digest. But I created that software so I could get through law school and graduate school. And then I took the bar exam on a typewriter, and it was an absolutely horrible experience. The typewriter broke in the last few minutes, and after going all that my whole life, my destiny was left in the hand of this broken daisy wheel on this IBM Selectric. And I just walked out of there, and I had my mission. And then a couple classmates of mine got together and said, we're going to do this. I got a stack of credit cards. I made a prototype with some very basic skills, and I started selling it left and right. And then we got real money and real programmers and real engineers. And there you go.
So how long ago was that?
That was 1996. Met my wife because of it, have my kids because of it.
So you having this disability has really helped you to understand how to help everyone, all these other kids who have similar challenges.
I mean, I see the changes, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. But the lumberjack swings the axe, and sometimes that trunk is harder and sometimes it's smaller. People have limitations. I have limitations. I know that I'm a disabled human being. There are things I will never be able to do, but I've got software that reads to me. I've got the most magnificent paralegal staff. It's like the skies opened and said, Adam, I'm sending you the perfect people in the world to support you. And I'm unstoppable. The amazing lesson I have in life is, if you can get to where you're supposed to be, if you can recognize the reason we are put on this earth as an individual, and usually it has to do with service, the weather changes, and the feelings about yourself changes, and the people you meet change, and the opportunities that you have change. And I don't think it would have mattered whether I was an electrician, a plumber, a lawyer, a bus driver. Once you find that connection to why we're here, and how incredible that reality is, that we have a purpose greater than consuming, acquiring, being better than other people, that we find our strength through helping others. And I think that's been as powerful as anything else in myself, but you got to get to know yourself. And for these disabled children who don't get a chance to know themselves, we get a second to raise our children, right? So we get this window. We get this window for them to tap into. Well, I'm challenged. Well, I might see the world differently, but I've got a heart. I've got a mind. I know what lights me up. I know what I'm good at. And I'm going to connect my lifeline to that, right? And that's an unstoppable force.
So to me, the one thing I'm taking away from, I think you're very inspirational. But the one thing I'm taking away from this is it was like there's like a few people in your life that have kind of jumped out and said, Adam, you're going to be great, and that seems like that has made a huge difference.
It has. I have a twin brother. And since he was 8, people were calling him Dr. Wasserman. And he's the head of this big hospital in New York City, running these departments. And, when I was 22 and I was knocking on doors, I was like looking at my brother's trajectory. And I was like, I get to be more than this. I want to be more than this. And I owe a lot of it to him. I really, really do.
So let me ask you about you personally attend IEP meetings, and for most of your clients, well, a lot of people don't even know you can bring a lawyer to an IEP meeting. First, explain what an IEP meeting is for people who don't know.
So we have different tracks in education. There's general education. I think everyone knows what it is. That's the one size fits all. You get what you get. You don't get upset. We run you through all the systems. It's like a Suburban with 95,000 miles on it with cigarette holes in the seat and a tape deck. That's public education. And some people get really good with that Suburban. But other kids, no. Other kids, that system doesn't work. And when we find a child's disability interferes with their ability to progress educationally, socially, behaviorally, emotionally, then we start looking at special education for them. We start identifying disabilities, and then we start looking to the federal government and the state government about what the school district responsibilities are to move the needle in that child's life. And if we can get them qualified under that realm, a district's responsibility to a family with disabilities changes completely. And it gives someone like me who understands that law, like a tax lawyer understands the tax law, to get in there with my tools and my problem-solving skills and get daylight and get above the weather pattern and get helpers to show up and help these kids. And they get services, they get reading interventions, they get psychological interventions, they get OT, they get PT, they get special physical education, they can get social skills training. There's a long list. And when we identify as a kid as a disability that fits within that parameters, it's not that they just fit in that parameters. The district has an obligation for them to progress, for them to improve, for them to grow, to have a shot at grabbing that ring off the carousel where they get a chance at a decent and meaningful and independent life. And if the kid can't do academics because the cognitive abilities are so challenged, then they got to train the kid to be independent and adaptive and point him in the direction of a meaningful life. That's the best thing I can give for an IEP. Problem is, you got these school districts with all these kids. A lot of people in all professions get to the point where they do the minimum and that's enough. And the other challenge is if the families don't know the words that I know, if they can't jockey in and out of the statute to compel action, a parent's concerns or worries start to look like complaints and they just don't take it seriously, right?
Yes, I've seen it personally in my own family, not my children, but my children's children.
Yeah, and if the kid doesn't qualify for an IEP, there's a level above that before they have to go back to Gen Ed. So we have levels and we have tools and we have guidelines. And in my state, we have a mighty court. So if we have a district that doesn't want to play ball or that I disagree with, or I can file a legal complaint and I can be in court in 90 days to get this thing resolved, not 2 or 3 years, but most of the time, 90 days. My firm's a little different. We're a social justice firm. Within my firm, I have a lot of similarities with the types of people who work in a school district. So if I take on a matter, I'm pretty sure there are violations and I'm pretty sure it's fixable. It's very different than someone who might handle someone who's personally injured by a doctor or a bus or a car. That's not this work. I have to qualify them clinically, and then I have to create a language so the district can grab onto and say, yeah, that's our responsibility. We'll do better, right? And that's the art of it all. So it's usually me against 12 to 16 people at a time.
So I have a question here because something's just running around in my mind, and that's the financial part of this. And I don't want to pry about it, but it's a situation where, let's say you have a kid who you feel that they have a lot of potential, but they don't show it. They're having all these challenges, and you come from a modest means, and you just the idea of even talking to an attorney, for your family is just almost like out of the question. How do you manage the financial side of that?
Let's dial it back, right? So these are my people. I have no better way to say that. These are my people. And I walk their walk, right? So money is never the first thing I think about. Let me be crystal. We are a social justice law firm. We are a for-purpose company. We believe in public interest law. We believe law should be accessible. So there's two routes, okay? So if someone's a good fit for me, I probably get 30, 40 calls a week. Some weeks it's slower, but I get a lot of phone calls, right? If it's a good fit and I can help, it's very rare that I'm going to turn anybody away. But we are a firm, and a law firm is an expensive proposition.
Yes.
Right. So we'll slide the scale. And if we can't slide the scale and I can't help them, we'll go to litigation. And the good news about litigation is Congress gave us a fee shifting statute. So if I take on a case and I prevail, it is the district's responsibility to pay those fees.
Okay. I didn't know that.
And that's not for the school-based work. That's for litigation.
Right.
But I'm not going to turn someone away, right?
So a parent wrote that you saved my child's life after dealing with LAUSD. What does that feel like to hear that from a family?
Well, I'm going to say this. I didn't put the ability in the child, and I didn't create the love for the child that mom and dad has. What I was able to do is get them above the weather pattern, to get sunlight and daylight and warmth into their life so they could have choices and meaning. Being told you're saving someone's life, I'm grateful for it, but I'm just a mechanic, right? And I'm just here to fix things. So it's a lovely, lovely thing to say. But I have to say it's the mother and the fathers and the children themselves. The children that wake up, the children realize that they want more. See, you can give somebody everything to change their life. But if they don't want it, it doesn't matter. And you can give people instruments of change, and if they're not interested, it doesn't make a difference. But, then we go back to the school district's responsibility, because if we're offering a child help under an IEP and they don't want it, a lot of times the school district has the responsibility to give that child therapy and counseling so they can expand their view and open that heart and find the desire to try. I mean, nothing shuts down a human more than defeat and being told you'll be nothing and feeling like you're nothing and having people in position authorities telling you just don't have it. I know what that feels like, right?
So what do you think about like school districts? I'm sure some of them are easier to deal with than other ones. And I'm also sure that there's a lot of people in those schools that they would like to help, but they feel like the school districts feel like they they can't because they have limited amounts of funds.
Well, that's not really their problem, my problem. I mean, I don't show up and tell school districts about my money problems. They shouldn't show up and tell me about their money problems. The mandate is absolute. The mandate is non-wavering, right? And I always go through this discussion. Do we give most of the resources to the children who could get through anything where the water bounces off their back? Or do we redistribute it to the kids that need it the most? Do we spend $100,000 resodding our football fields when we got 15, 11th graders reading at a second grade level and we need to hire more reading interventionists? It's a tough question, but I think I've never met a person who's gone into teaching because they didn't want to help people.
Yes.
And so I do a lot of training. I'm a training junkie, and I want to connect with that dimension of those individuals because when I can, we always work it out. But lawyers, we don't have a great representation. People think we show up to shake people down, to threaten and intimidate, and use our license to practice law as a lead pipe. That's not what this is. And so there's a lot of demyelination that has to go on before people will say, Adam, you're one of us. You're a team member. I have former superintendents of special education that work within my firm. So when those districts that I cannot get along with, I'll send them in and they'll melt the ice like that. You don't get a lot of that. Law firms are like, pay me. I don't care. Pay me, and this is the best I can do, and I'm sorry. I'm in it for as long as they'll let me stay in, right?
So here, just for fun, I'm going to switch it up just a little bit and do some rapid fire questions. IEP or 504 plan, which do parents confuse more often?
They're very confusing. A 504 plan is a general education accommodation plan. 504 says, it's hard for you to hear, we'll put you to the front of the room. Can't open the door, we'll open the door for you. It's difficult for you to handwrite, we'll give you notes. You're distracted at times, we'll prompt you to pay attention. That's not an IEP, that's a 504. That does not give parents the protections that I'm talking about. IEP is Johnny's reading at a third grade level this year. Next year, he'll read at 4.5 grade level, and we will provide the reading interventions for him to do that. And we have an absolute responsibility to the family to make sure he makes reasonable progress in light of that goal. Child has severe anxiety. They will not leave their room. They will not open the door. They are terrified of the world. It is the school's responsibility under an IEP to find a placement that child can go to, be it residential, specialized private school, or a specialized program within the school district at no cost to the parents, right? IEP is, I can't handwrite because I've got a neurological disease. IEP is, we will train Alice to use a computer that will write for her, that will speak with her, that will teach her language, that will allow her to communicate the world around her. That's an IEP. So a lot of school districts, what they do is they're like, well, we'll give you your 504, right? Never take a 504 as a consolation prize. It is never meant to be a shortcut. IEP or 504, the path to it is the same. A district must do a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation to make that decision about what's appropriate. But most often, school districts will say, we don't need to do that assessment. We don't need to take a closer look. Here's your 504 plan. And with families with limited education or limited language or limited resources, that happens a lot. And if this system is supposed to work, we're supposed to get the broad view of the child and then bring the camera in and understand the disability and the appropriateness of whether we use a 504 or an IDA. Don't take a 504 when somebody throws it at you, right? If your child is falling asleep in class, do not take a 504. If your child has no friends and comes home every day crying, do not take a 504. If a child can never remember what they're reading, do not take a 504.
So toughest school district in California to negotiate with.
I don't want to. You know what?
That's a loaded question. That's not even fair because I'm going to get you in trouble with that. Let's skip that one.
Most of these districts have really good legal counsel, and most of these districts know when there's a problem. These lawyers will say, "There's a problem. We need to fix it," right? But there are some that just want to fight. There are some that want to act like they're representing an insurance company and we're not dealing with children and we're on a limited time frame. Those are the hard ones. That's the tough one because they can set up obstacles, they can appeal, they can fight, they can obfuscate, and then it changes, right? I mean, look, parents who don't speak English, they're supposed to get everything in Spanish. They're supposed to have reliable and talented translators. Doesn't happen. And so what you get is you get years go by when nothing happens. Those districts are the hardest ones to deal with. But we fix it most of the time. It's fixable. I can't make up for lost time, but quite often I can get these families something called compensatory education, which sometimes is a very meaningful sum of money, which says you didn't get reading intervention or math intervention or behavioral intervention or therapy for 2 years. District's going to set up a fund that the family can draw down on so they can go out and hire the best and the brightest.
That's fantastic. So favorite thing you learned studying philosophy in Jerusalem?
Well, that's when my spiritual antenna went up. And I think we're going back to the meta-consciousness again. When you're able to, when you get answers as to why we're here and what we're doing on earth and how everybody matters and how we draw from the same source, the shine on all that other stuff starts to wear off kind of quickly, right? And the meaning of our life. I got one client. This poor young man is so horribly depressed. He wants to be a social media musician magnet, right? And he's talented, but he's got his own way, the way Radiohead had their own sound, and people don't get it, right? But that's the only place he looks for his meaning. And I had a long meeting with him last week, and I said, can we look for meaning in some other dimensions and realms? Can we find what we're doing here by looking in some other directions, right? Because that's really what it is, right? It's one of my favorite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Have you read it, Zane?
I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with it.
So it's about the Holocaust, and it talks about how did some people find the will to endure what happened every day? How did some people go to sleep, wake up the next day, and not lose their ability to live, right? While others said, not another second. Now I'm simplifying what he wrote, and I don't want to disrespect my ancestors, but when he wrote, when people can find a why that's greater to what's happening to me, that why is the trump card. And that why gives us the ability to fly over what we're bumping into and get back to that meta-consciousness.
So you must be a fan of Simon Sinek then.
I am a fan of human development. I am a fan of potential. I am a fan of when people say no, how do I get to yes? These days, I'm a huge fan of Chris Voss. He was the head hostage negotiator for the FBI and the CIA, I think, for the long time. And he teaches you how do you connect with people who don't want to listen, who have nothing to lose, nothing to sacrifice? How do you open their hearts and their mind to looking towards different alternatives? And, his practice is based on decades of wisdom. And he helps you get to the why with people. Why should I keep trying? Why should I not give up? Why do I keep looking in different directions for help, right? But it takes a lot of resilience and strength to do that.